Hi everyone. There are certain films out there that are terrible. So terrible, in fact, you might say that they're funny. There are other films that, over the course of history, have taken on a whole new meaning, as events that have happened in the real world since the movie's release have shaped the perception of the film into something entirely new, into something some might deem reprehensible. And I want to take a second to explore films like this. This is Making Wrong Things Right. That's right, we are going to start a new series. I want to have a nice variety of things to do, so without further ado, let's get started. Today we're going to be looking at the 2004 film, Fat Albert. And boys, there are lots to talk about. So in the wake of the Cosby scandal and Bill Cosby's subsequent arrest, there's a sort of sour taste in the mouth of anyone who mentions any of Bill Cosby's properties, and none of those properties are more famous, in my opinion, than the 1960s cartoon series Fat Albert, starring none other than Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, which was so popular and to this day still has such a cult following that in 2004, Bill Cosby decided to create a film based upon the Fat Albert cartoon series, and he takes some interesting strides doing so. There's so much to talk about with this movie that I really have to split this into two parts. It's gonna release the second part tomorrow about the looking back on it with Bill Cosby being in the position that he is today. But today I wanted to talk about the meta-narrative theming and the problems with taking something real and turning it into something fictional in the context of a meta-narrative. And let me explain what I mean by that. So for those of you who are unaware, which I assume is many of you, the Bill Cosby film, Fat Albert, from 2004, the plot of it is, there's this girl, right, and her name is Doris, and she's really sad because she doesn't have any friends, and she watches Fat Albert, the TV show, the real TV show, except it's not the real TV show, it's the fake version made for the movie, and so Fat Albert in the TV show sees that Doris is sad because she doesn't have any friends, and so the Fat Albert and his friends, the Cosby Kids, crawl out of the TV into the real world to help Doris. And already this presents a myriad of problems. First of all, the characters of Fat Albert even mention when they're in the real world that, like, oh, we're free now because we don't have to have anyone write lines for us or anything. But if they've only been speaking lines that have been written for them the entirety of their lives, then how do they know what real intelligence is? Like, are they being fed lines on the TV show? Are they, because in the real world we know that people speak these lines and then they're dubbed over and then they're said by the characters. So are we meant to believe this is the case, or are we meant to believe that these characters exist in some sort of a fictional vacuum where they're being fed these lines to say in the show? It's highly confusing. So there's this character named Danielle, and in the context of the show Fat Albert that we're being presented in the movie, Fat Albert has to talk to Danielle because Danielle is sad about something. And Fat Albert is interrupted by Doris crying, and is like, what's that? She's crying. And Danielle, who is frustrated, she's like, you have to focus on your line, you have to say your lines, right? And then she says one thing, which is a crux to the entire movie, and she says, I was a voice actor on Looney Tunes, I don't get paid enough for this, which creates a confusing situation. So is Danielle a character in Fat Albert? like Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids are characters in Fat Albert, or is she a voice actor? This is important because it undermines the conceit of the film, which is that these characters exist in this TV world apart from the creative process of them being conceived and voiced and thought out. And this isn't the first time. Well, this is the first time it comes up in the film, the situation with Danielle. But this isn't the last time they have this dissonance between these characters existing as real beings and them being fictional creations. So Fat Albert and the gang, the whole gang's here. You got Bucky, you got Mushmouth, you got Dumb Donald, you got Old Weird Harold, you got Bill, Russell is in the TV world, while everyone else is in the real world. But the whole gang's there. They're in the real North Philly, which the show takes place in the fictional North Philly. And the thing is, the real North Philly, like, the coloration on the buildings is the same as in the show. There's the junkyard. They still have the junkyard in the real world. And virtually everything about this world, the real world, is the same as the fictional world. And this sort of presents a problem. So, as many of you might know, Fat Albert is based on Bill Cosby's experience growing up in North Philly and hanging out with his friends. So, in this movie, Fat Albert goes to meet Bill Cosby late in the movie. And what he learns is that this girl, Doris, her last name is Doris, she's Doris Robertson, right? And Bill Cosby tells Albert, spoilers if you want to watch this movie, but Fat Albert is told by Bill Cosby that Doris Robertson is the granddaughter of Albert Robertson, who is the real person that Fat Albert is based on. And what makes this even better is that Doris has a sister, right? Her name's Lori. And Fat Albert, for the entirety of the movie, has a crush on Lori Robertson. And they, like, go out on dates and stuff. And so we're led to believe that Fat Albert, who is based on Lori's grandfather, Albert Robertson, now has a crush on... Did someone say Electrocomplex? Yeah, this is the problem when you have the real world, and then the fake world. And that's really the source of the problems with this movie, is that Fat Albert is based on Bill Cosby's real experiences. This movie world is a parallel to the real world. But the Fat Albert in the film is based on the Fat Albert in the real world. And the real world in the movie is based off of our real world. And the dissonance between these four worlds, right? Where you have fake Fat Albert, fake world, real world, real world. And the interplay between these four worlds is what creates this strange, disconnected meta-narrative that makes watching Fat Albert so much fun. At some point, Dumb Donald, who, if you are familiar, Dumb Donald has a mask over his head, right? So he's in the real world and he's learning, he's becoming not Dumb Donald, he's Smart Donald now. And he takes off his mask and it's revealed that he has a face. And so he has a face under his mask, right? And so then he goes back into the TV world, and it turns out that he doesn't have a face anymore, because the animators never drew a face for him. So we're led to believe that he would have a face in the real world, even though he doesn't have a face in the TV world, which doesn't really make sense. Oh, and don't even get me started on the Fat Albert in the movie, because the Fat Albert in the movie, the animation style, it looks like a Disney animated style. Like, the style is totally different. It's very fluid. It's very crisp. Which, if you are familiar with the actual Fat Albert cartoon from the '60s, it was limited animation. Think like Hanna-Barbera. Like, think Scooby-Doo or the Flintstones, except with less animation. So the dissonance with that is, like, it looks like the show is animated in present day, but it's not a reboot. It's the real thing. So it's the real Fat Albert, which is being written presumably in the present, even though the original Fat Albert was in the '60s. So is the Fat Albert in the show present day? Because it couldn't be if it was such a cult classic show. Is the real world can't be set in the '60s because it's clearly set in the modern day, and that's a very clear plot point. The show couldn't have been done in the '60s because the show and the movie has such good animation quality, but it also couldn't have been done in the '60s because we have current voice actors voicing that they don't get paid enough for this. But then how could that be the case if the characters are real? And so you understand my frustration at how unclear it is, the structure of the world of Fat Albert 2004.